Good evening, members of the public and meeting attendees. Just to let you know, we'll be getting started in a few minutes. But welcome, and we're happy you're here to join us tonight. Good evening, members of the public who are joining us tonight. We might just, it looks like we still have a few other folks that are logging in, so we'll get started in just another moment or two. Okay, well, good evening, everyone. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight on the topic of community police oversight. We're very appreciative of you all taking time out of your schedules to be with us. For those who don't know me, my name is Eric Engelbart. I'm the Deputy City Manager here with the City of San Leandro. I've worked for the community for the past 8 years or so. And joining me this evening, I have two colleagues here from who are assisting us with as moderators tonight, and I'll let them provide an opportunity to introduce themselves. Teresa and Brian.
Hi, good evening. I'm Teresa Magula, and I am a member of the OIR Group. We are a team of police practices experts that the city has brought on to assist with the process of creating civilian oversight in your city. And we're grateful to be here today. I have with me my colleague, Brian.
And good evening, everyone. I'm Brian Corr. I'm coming to you from Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I'm also working with the OIR Group, and I'm a past president of NACOLE, the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement. So I'm very glad to be here with you tonight, and this is part of what I do with communities around the country, is just help in many ways, including really ensuring that the voice of the community is present as municipalities and governments work to create civilian oversight. So thank you for being here.
Okay. And with that, just a brief housekeeping item as well before we get started. I do want to disclose that we are recording tonight's meeting for the benefit of those members of the public who may not be able to join us. We will be also posting the meeting recording on the city website. And this is also the second part of a two-part program. We had a similar event this past Saturday, although it's identical content that we'll be presenting. We're simply providing two opportunities for folks to attend. And at the end of our presentation, we'll have a robust opportunity for public comments and questions. And so with that, we will. Okay, so just a little bit of background as to our goals for this evening. We want to start off just to give you a little bit of background on the process that we've taken to date on exploring civilian police oversight here in San Leandro. We'll then take a few moments to share an overview of a working model that we're currently exploring. Or then, like I said earlier, we're going to have a robust opportunity to hear your feedback or answer any questions you might have. And all of this, of course, is part of the community input process that is shaping the model. It goes without saying, ultimately, in order for police oversight to work and to be functional, community insight and community input is key. And so, and we just want to share that that is a very sincere interest in ours as part of these meetings to receive that community input. Also, I do note that my colleague Janelle Cameron from the City Manager's Office is also joining us as part of our panel, and want to give her an opportunity as well just to say hello and introduce herself.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Eric. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this afternoon and taking time out of your evening to be a part of this very informative, important process. So thank you all, and thank you, Eric.
Okay, and here's just a little bit of background. Ooh, excuse me. Pardon me, I pressed the wrong button. Okay, there we go. A little bit of background as to why we're here and some of the background information as to what led us here tonight. Certainly going back at least a decade here in San Leandro, we've had various community surveys that have taken place here in the community. And one of the issue areas that's always kind of risen towards the top of community concerns and community priorities is public safety. And it goes without saying, of course, that can mean different things to different people, but it is worth noting that the concept of feeling safe is an important community priority going back for quite some time. Of course, at the national level and at the state level here in California, there's been evolving national conversations about policing. There's been various events that have taken place that have galvanized public opinion. More closer to home here in San Leandro, of course, we had the tragic death of Stephen Taylor in April of this last year as part of an officer-involved shooting event. Subsequent to that, this past February, our city council hosted a dedicated work session on the topic of community police oversight. Those of you who may not have had an opportunity to view that event or participate in it, the recording is available on our Meeting Central website. I'd encourage you to take a look at it. That presentation was quite in depth, and it gave a broad overview of just all different types of models of police oversight that exist out there. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that. At the conclusion of that meeting and following opportunities for public input, the City Council also did provide feedback to us, and they shared their comments. And one of the things, some of the consensus that emerged was there was interest in what's known as a hybrid community oversight model that we'll be diving into in a little more detail here in a few moments. In addition to that, this past July, our City Council hosted a Saturday planning session, which was an opportunity for the council to discuss all their various policy priorities for the upcoming 6 months period, which we're now in the middle of. And among that, and at the end of that meeting, they identified their top 10 policy priorities for the next 6 months, of which police oversight was one of their top priorities, which has also helped inform the discussion we're having tonight. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, just dialogue with the community is just a foundational element of our process here. The program is really, it's crucial to have community buy-in for this to be a successful model. And so we've been having these various opportunities to help provide public feedback. In addition to those public meetings I already outlined before, of course, we had our meeting this past Saturday, tonight's meeting, and there'll be future additional opportunities as well for further dialogue that I'll get into in just a few moments. So as I mentioned before, we are presently looking at what's known as a hybrid oversight model, and it would include 2 key elements, and that would both be a community police review board as well as an independent police auditor function. So those are kind of those 2 key elements. And again, and that was also shaped by both that feedback that the City Council provided to us, and it does also align with some feedback we've received through some of those early listening sessions and conversations we've had with the community. I do also want to acknowledge the hard work of the local community group known as the Slate Coalition, who's been actively involved in this process and has shared some work products and recommendations with as well, which has also been helped to inform the model that we're discussing tonight. So before we dive in a little further, I think it's also worthwhile to just share some insights of some of the considerations that we had to take into account as we explored this idea. Certainly no surprise here, as a local government agency, we are bound by inherent legal limitations, just like all municipalities. In addition to that, just like virtually every municipality here in California, the vast majority of our city employees are members of collective bargaining groups, and those groups are, work according to labor contracts that are adopted by the city council. And so to the extent the proposed model that we're exploring would affect those contracts, it is incumbent upon us as an organization and by law, in fact, to engage in good faith bargaining with those groups. In addition to that, just as a local government, like all governments and all organizations, we are subject to just inherent budgetary and resource constraints. We do have a finite tax base here in the community. And so depending on the model that's explored and the way it's structured and the powers it has and the staffing that's allocated to support the model, there are associated cost impacts. And so it's important that those cost impacts and budgetary impacts be evaluated and publicly disclosed to the community as part of the process. Also, just a best practice, we always like to speak with our peer jurisdictions here in California and in other places as well. There are numerous examples of other municipalities that have already set up civilian police oversight models. And so we've reached out to a number of those organizations and our counterparts here in California to just hear any lessons learned, getting any insights from them about best practices. And so that feedback's been incorporated as well. And of course, as I've mentioned several times now, public input is just really key to making sure this is a successful process, and the feedback you all provide us tonight, can be also further incorporated into the model as well. And so with that, maybe we're starting at the top here. As I mentioned, our proposed model does include those two key elements. The first of which that I'm going to explain here in a little further detail is that the Community Police Review Board. First and foremost, this would be completely independent from the police department, and that is of foundational importance for these types of models. We envision right now that it would be a 7-member body, be with diversity criteria to ensure just that we have a broad cross-section of the community represented on the board. In addition to that, we are considering including a non-voting student representative so that we ensure that local students here in the community have voice in the process as well. This next element here, I think just this speaks to just the importance of that independence from the police department. We are currently looking at a model that would have a maximum of no more than 2 individuals with law enforcement background who would be eligible to serve on the board. And that's part of that is just to ensure that the board isn't too heavily skewed in one way or the other, and that we have that balance. Also, just like all of our other boards and commissions here in the community, current city employees would be would not be eligible to serve on the board. I do want to acknowledge there's been a lot of public concerns about potential influence of current San Diego police officers or members of the Police Officers Association having undue influence on the board. And just to be clear, we would not envision any role in which current city employees, including current police officers, have any role on that. And I do also want to acknowledge there's been a lot of concern expressed as well about even former San Leandro police officers serving on the board. And in response to that feedback, I can just assure you all we are taking a very close look at that and about the possibility of further modifications to that to ensure that independence in regards to even former SLPD officers. In addition to that, I think we would, just like all of our other boards and commissions, many of you have interacted with city government, may be familiar with some of them. Some of the classic examples, of course, are Board of Zoning Adjustments or Planning Commission or the Arts Commission. Well, this would be another board and commission that be added to that roster. And just like all those other boards and commissions, we envision it would be appointed by the city council and that they would be well trained. Of course, just given the complexity of the subject matter, we think it's important that all these members have the opportunity for robust training. In addition, we think it's important that they have a broad policy review authority. This is an area also, this model has evolved over time based on public feedback. And generally speaking, right now, we do envision that this body would have broad authority to review police policies based on majority input of or majority requests of the board once it's formed. In addition to that, this body would have robust opportunities to support public outreach to the community, let the public know they're there, create a new forum for those members of the public who may have had interactions with the police department that they want to report out on or concerns they have in regard to community policing in general. This would be a forum for them to attend and provide feedback and have influence. In addition to that, we envision that this body would have an opportunity to provide input into the police department's annual budget, and to the extent there was ever a vacancy at the police chief level, that they would provide an opportunity to have some influence on the hiring of that. Now, by virtue of our city council manager form of government, It's worth noting that, like all department heads, ultimately the selection of a police chief is subject to the discretion of the city manager. But with that said, again, we would envision an opportunity for this board to have input into the city manager's decision-making on if there were a vacancy. In addition to that, we envision that the board would have an opportunity to help refer citizen complaints over to the other element of the board that we're going to get into in a few moments, which is that independent police auditor. And lastly, we believe it would be important that this board have the opportunity to develop an annual public report and share that publicly with the city council. Moving now over to the other element of this model is the independent police auditor, which I may also refer to as the IPA. It goes without saying, but the nature of this, and it's just its naming convention, it would be very independent. It would be independent of the police department. We envision it would be appointed through a request for proposals process with a national recruitment. There's a lot of folks out there in this world who do have relevant subject matter expertise. And so we want to just make sure that basically there would be an opportunity for an independent ability for this person to be reviewed and onboarded. In addition to that, they would essentially, a big part of their role would be having a seat at the table with the internal affairs process and serving as basically a apolitical, nonpartisan, non-political advisor to that internal review process, internal affairs process. In addition to that, they would be serving as a subject matter expert to the review board, and they would be attending those review boards' regular meetings, providing their expertise. They would also, to the extent as complaints or citizen complaints were received by the city, they could assist in classifying those complaints. In addition to that, an important role of the IPA is to analyze police data and trends, and to the extent there are data and trends that are of concern, they could report out on those to the board as part of those regular meetings. Same thing, statistics and trends, things of that nature. And they could also help support the public outreach process. In addition, they could also develop an annual report that could be submitted to both the review board as well as the city council. And also an important element we believe is helpful for this process is that the auditor could also help facilitate mediation for some of those, so maybe what I would classify as lower level interactions or of concern between, say, a police officer and a member of the public, where where independent mediation could be facilitated to help resolve some of the issues. And so with that, just in terms of our next steps, I know we provide a lot of information, but as I mentioned earlier, we'll have an opportunity for questions and comments tonight. We're having our public outreach meetings today, of which today is one, Saturday's meeting was another. In addition to that, as I mentioned before, we're already conducting some parallel internal dialogue with our labor groups. And all this feedback that we're receiving as part of these meetings is being incorporated into a draft ordinance that we're working on developing. And we envision presenting that ordinance, a draft ordinance, to the city council on November 15th. As I mentioned earlier, that is still very much a working draft right now. And so these meetings provide an opportunity to help further shape the elements of that ordinance. And so with that, I'm going to now hand things over to Teresa and Brian.
Eric, thank you so much for that overview. I already see that we have some attendees raising their hand, which is really exciting to see people interested in participating and providing some feedback. For those of you who may not be familiar with the format of these kinds of sessions, we do request that people use the raise hand functionality, and we will call on you, allow you to talk by unmuting, and we'll go ahead and listen to your comments. We also have the Q&A functionality open during this particular webinar. If you have a question or a comment that you wish to type in, whether that be because you're uncomfortable speaking or because of you just want it to be kind of an offline technical question, please have those typed in there. I will be monitoring those during our session as well. But before we jump into calling on some different individuals who have raised their hands, I wanted to go over our meeting agreements. And we do this in the spirit of collaboration and contribution so that everyone can have the best opportunity to speak and participate as they wish during this session. So we ask that people share this time with other community members. We will allow others the space to offer ideas and opinions. If you're not speaking in the moment, we ask that you please listen respectfully. And as I said, you may choose not to speak at all. If you do choose to speak, you will be mindful of how long you choose to speak. And in the instance that there may be someone who's saying something that's different or distinct from your point of view, we'd like to encourage you not to assume for others and to be respectful and constructive if you're expressing a disagreement with something that someone has said. I like to let those sit for a moment so that we can all come to terms with what we're up to for this session. And I already see, as I mentioned, a few hands raised. So I'm going to go ahead and open it. Our first speaker this evening will be John, excuse me for butchering your last name, Minot. John Minot, I've unmuted. You can go ahead and share with us this evening.
Hi, thank you so much. Good evening. It is John Minot, although that's fine.
I tried.
So thank you so much for presenting this and giving us this opportunity for feedback. I'm a San Leandro resident. I'm excited about the potential of this new body, and I think it's very important to see through. I think, as described, it's extremely needed for public legitimacy of our use of force collectively. I want to say specifically that I think it's really important, specifically not to have law enforcement backgrounds on the commission as a maximum or as anything. I think I would respectfully suggest that it's not really a matter of balance. I don't think that this is the kind of thing that you balance. I think the police are the instrument of the public in practice. They need, when you're a member of the public dealing with the police, you need to know that they are going to treat you the way you would do in their place. So I think the reasonable rubric for police to be overseen by all the requisite functions of this board is by the public at large rather than themselves or their peers. There was something written that really stuck with me by Robert Peel, who's regarded as the original founder of the modern concept of a police force. He said, "The police are the public and the public are the police. The police are just people who are paid to give full-time attention to matters that are general public duties." I don't think there is inherently a different perspective. I think that we need to have members of the general public be the community police review board. Thank you.
All right, thank you, John. Really appreciate your sharing and being willing to be first. People aren't always willing to do that. So, you know, again, as Eric, the deputy city manager, mentioned, people have been weighing in on this. So it's really helpful to have your perspective and especially sharing those historic words from Sir Robert Peel. So, do we have more people in the queue?
We do. We have Pam Wool, and Pam, I'm going to unmute you. Thank you and welcome.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Okay, great. Yeah, again, I'm so excited that we're taking this step in San Leandro. You know, as everyone knows, the murder of Stephen Taylor was just devastating to the community, and this is a really important step that we're taking. I wanted to voice as well that I don't, I'm really glad that you said there won't be any current law enforcement, but I also feel like I don't really see the purpose of having former law enforcement on the review board. 7 people is not very large, and 2 out of 7 is a really big number. The police force, police and the police perspective are going to be well represented in all of these processes, and this review board to me should be the community, something very different from that and outside of that system. So that I would really hope that you could reconsider and not have any former law enforcement or law enforcement background on this committee, that this is something really different. I wanted to also, I guess, ask some questions. One is about access to records? Like, are there, I feel like that's going to be something that's really important, just the access that both the IPA and the review board has. And I kind of just am wondering like how much access they'll have. And funding as well. I think the IPA will be funded, and just kind of wondering, I mean, maybe that's something that's too premature to talk about now, I'm not sure. But just what the funding is going to look like for this, and whether it's been decided. And then another question I had was, it says input into the police budget, and I guess I'm wondering what that means. Is it just making suggestions? Do they have any, is there more teeth than that? Or just, I guess just wondering more about what that meant. And also wanted to say, I think it's really important for the review board to be able to set its own agenda. I don't know if that's implied as part of them having kind of their broad policy review authority, like if they get to decide what they look at, or if someone else is setting the agenda. But I think it would be important for them to set their own agenda. And I think that's my feedback for now. Again, thanks so much for this really thoughtful process. I appreciate, being able to give input.
Ms. Wolf,
well, thank you, Pam. No, I'm sorry. I was just going to say thank you. And then Eric, I imagine you probably got those 4 questions. So I won't try to recap them, but I know it's talking about records, budget, agendas, and one other thing.
Access to records.
Yeah, access and policy, and the policy review.
Policy review.
Yeah. So yeah, I'll have happy to kind of take a shot at addressing most of those questions. I think first and foremost, in terms of your question about former law enforcement. So for example, non-SLPD, taking as an example, someone who lives in town, who is retired, who may be a longtime San Leandro resident, never worked for SLPD, but perhaps worked for another agency. Perhaps they worked for CHP or another neighboring municipality. I know this is an open concern for a number of members of the public about that, and whether that role might influence them. I think the other, balancing perspective we've heard from others is whether or not do we want this to also be an inclusive body, and do we want to somehow make someone ineligible simply because of a career path they may have had at once upon a time earlier in their life, and may have long since departed from that career and maybe working in another field, or long since retired. And just by virtue of that experience earlier in their life, are they now, for the rest of their life, disallowed from any participation in a community body? And I think that's some of the balancing aspects of this. And not everyone would agree with that lens or those statements. I'm simply sharing some of the feedback that counter perspective we have heard from other community residents about that issue. And I think that's part of what informs some of the recommendations you see here. With regards to access to records, I think it's important that this body would have access to any and all public records, and we would ensure that they were provided access to those records. Now, switching over to the independent police auditor, they would even have access to more in-depth records. I think generally speaking, the review board is generally considered more of a policy review body is that's their main purpose. And the independent police auditor, though, by virtue of having that seat at the table as part of the internal affairs process, would have access to those personnel records and all those other types of classified as non-public records. So there is a role for that as well. And then they could be reporting out to the review board on those kind of trends and data. In terms of the funding question you had, I think in general, it goes without saying, it's important that this body have sufficient resources that it can access in terms of staff resources at its meetings to ensure that responsiveness to the questions they have, or providing the analysis they're looking for and reporting back to them. So that is something we're actively looking at right now in terms of that staffing. Certainly the city council has already allocated a not insignificant amount of money towards this program in the current year budget, as well as the second full year budget. And so that's something we're actively looking at as well. In terms of the role of this body in helping shape the police department budget, we do also envision that, yes, they would have an opportunity, basically, that there would be an opportunity each year for the police department to discuss with them their budget and for them to have influence on them. But again, this is a recommending body, a policy review body, an advisory body. And by virtue of the council manager form of government, our current structure, ultimately, the final decision on any budget allocations, are are the domain of the city council ultimately. And so this body, though, would of course have an opportunity to provide recommendations to the city council in regards to the police budget. And then lastly, in terms of that policy review authority, that was the last question, I believe. As I mentioned there, and it's shown on that bullet point, we do believe that they would have this broad policy review authority on any of those issue areas that are, of compelling community-wide concern, as basically based on the direction of a majority of the board. If a majority of the board believes it's a policy issue of compelling community-wide concern, that they have an opportunity to look at it. So I believe that's covered all the questions. Teresa, if we want to allow our next raised hand to speak.
Our next speaker is going to be Doug Spaulding. Allow you to talk and go ahead and unmute. And welcome to our session tonight, Douglas.
Thanks, Teresa. Thanks for facilitating. And I really appreciate the process that the city is pursuing. And in particular, Eric, I would thank you for the leadership you've shown in this. It's very promising what you are proposing. I have a page full of notes, and I'm going to really try not to talk on and on and on. But I do want to say a few things, tweak it here and tweak it there. In terms of the review board, I definitely agree with the comments in the sense that Mr. Minot and Ms. Wool gave about this being like a citizens review board. And so I think it's, I'm not asking you, please don't put on former law enforcement. I'm telling you that's essential, because that really will change the character of this. And we won't get the outcomes that we're searching for. In response to Mr. Pond's question about the Police Chief Advisory Board, that really is kind of like the flip side of the coin, right? That is an advisory board that the police chief has had, which is basically, a bunch of yes men and yes women, agreeing with the police chief, oftentimes giving support, giving advice and whatnot. But this is a more critical eye. And I'm a member of a pioneer family in San Leandro. My family goes back to the very beginning in 1872. And I am pained by the racist and white supremacist history of San Leandro. And so I have been working to try to overcome that. And, I come at this as an activist who's advocated for defunding the police. And I'm here as a serious citizen, wanting to think about police oversight that's going to be effective. So to make the review board effective, I agree that it needs money, it needs resources. I do not think that the review board members need to be paid. I don't know if anybody's suggesting that, but I don't think that is necessary. This is a volunteer position. But I do agree with the sense that it probably should be larger. Maybe you could double the number of representatives. And then each council member, the 5 council members and the mayor, if they each had like 2 nominees, that gets you to 13. And then you add a student or 2 representatives, that gets you to 13 or 14. And I would like to see the members nominate people, and then I would like to see the council work towards consensus on all agreeing on a slate of review members. What the term is, whether half have a 1-year term and half have a 2-year term, and then you have some sort of changeover. I think that would be important to think about. To review policy, you got to have access to documents, access to people, and you have to have cooperation of the departments. You have to be able to look at the budget and make serious proposals about increasing budget or decreasing budget. And I think that if it is effective, then the review board will be able to do effective outreach and get more and more and more of our citizenry interested in, involved in, concerned about the police. In terms of the independent police auditor, this does need to be a paid position. We have at least one person in town who's very well qualified. I'm thinking Bob Bailey. But maybe we could advertise for it. Oh, I forgot to say, I think that representation on the review board, there has to be an application process. I mean, I am thinking about it sort of the way the budget task force was put together. I thought that was pretty good. And then I think those applications have to be transparent. People have to be able to discover what's in them and see who's applying to be on their review board. Same with the IPA. I think there has to be an application process. I would see that going to the review board recommending 1 or 2 candidates, and then the city manager doing the hire.
Douglas, this is Brian Corr. I just want to say, I'm not cutting you off in any way, but just want to be mindful of time because
Brian,
okay.
You and I think alike, because that's what I was thinking about, and I'm thinking that I can rest on what I've said. So I'm
Okay.
going to hear what others have to say.
All right, thank you. And I'm sure that since you said you have a page of notes, I'm sure you could submit those, and we'll make sure that the information on how to email and contact people is available before we end this session. So,
Brian, you're not going to be able to read my handwriting, but I'll be happy to add more later.
All right. Well, thank you for all those thoughts and for your honesty about your handwriting. But I really do appreciate what you're bringing to this meeting. So, Teresa, I think we probably have more people who are waiting.
We
to speak.
do. Our next speaker is going to be Whitney. Whitney, I've unmuted you, and we welcome you.
Teresa, before we allow Whitney to speak, I think we should just speak in case people have similar comments to Doug. Maybe we can address some of his comments, because I think the process that is planned to be set up will address some of his comments. So Eric, if you want to.
Absolutely, Janelle. Yes, I tried to take my best of notes from Mr. Spaulding's comments, and I can just run through them quickly. But at a high level, in terms of the question of pay for the review board, I would say, we want to, as I mentioned earlier, this is one among many already existing boards and commissions that already exist here in the community. Looking at this through an equity lens, it's worthwhile to note that none of our board and commissions that currently exist receive direct pay to serve as a board and commissioner. And so to the extent that the city council wants to reevaluate that and whether or not boards and commissioners in general should be paid, that's certainly a conversation that we can help facilitate and provide analysis on that. But we are looking, being careful to look at this through an equity lens in terms of, if other boards and commissioners, say, for example, members of the Board of Zoning Adjustments aren't receiving pay, then it raises a question as to why would one board receive pay and another would not. So that's one of the lenses through which we're looking at this. With regards to the size of the body, similarly, this kind of part of the rationale for the recommendation on 7, the vast majority of our boards and commissions here in San Leandro are either 5 members, 7 members, or 9 members. And so we are, again, looking through that similarity lens, ensuring that this is also structured in a way that there's some analogousness to it with those other boards. In terms of the IPA, yes, absolutely. We envision the IPA would be paid. We would envision that this would, they would be hired essentially as a consultant through a robust national recruitment process, independent process that would allow city manager to make an appointment, and that they would ultimately be paid for their time. In terms of the application process, yes, I think the budget task force that Mr. Spaulding referenced is somewhat analogous in terms of that selection process, whereby we would, be issuing an application for any member of the community who wants to apply. There would be an application time period announced, and then they could apply, and then those applications would be presented to the council members for them to review and then make their selections. Also important to note that, just generally speaking here, our selection process for boards and commission members is typically a two-stage process. So typically what happens is there's these initial nominations that are announced by the council members, and those are shared publicly at a public council meeting. And then at a next subsequent meeting, the actual selection of those nominations are actually finalized. And so to the extent that there's community concerns identified when that initial draft list is released, the public would have an opportunity to share their input or concerns before the final list comes back again. And there are even examples in the not so distant past of where there were concerns about nominees, and there were some changes that could be then made based upon that public input. And then I believe that covered all the comments, just in general though, but yes, in terms of the IP, we do also envision that the board would have an opportunity to provide a weigh-in in terms of prior to the selection of the actual auditor by the city manager. I believe that captured everything. And with that.
Thanks, Eric.
Thank you.
So I guess, Teresa, you have, I know you have a queue, and you mentioned some questions, I think, in Q&A as well.
We do. I'm going to have Whitney share with us first. She's been patiently waiting. Thank you. Whitney, can you unmute yourself? Are you still with us?
Yes, sorry.
There we go. Gotcha.
I'm good now? You can hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, so thank you for this process and for, opening it up to feedback from residents. I mostly had the same questions that Pam shared, and you already answered those really well, so I'm not going to ask them again. But I do just want to echo what I'm hearing from a lot of other people. So it's just another voice saying I would be opposed to former law enforcement. And you said specifically in your response to Pam that that it would be discounting, excluding members of the community by excluding former law enforcement based on the job that they held at one point in their lives. And I just want to say that that doesn't really hold water, because you already said you're not going to include members of people who work for the city, who are employed by the city. We're already excluding people. That's by nature of this board. There are already exclusions being made. So I really do agree that it would be better not to have anyone affiliated with law enforcement. And in fact, I think it'd be more important that it fairly represents the community and includes people who have been the most impacted by police conduct. And that representation is far more important, because as Pam said, there is already going to be police participation in this process. And the people who have been, BIPOC and marginalized communities that have been impacted by police, and families of victims of police terror should be at the table in any future. If we really want to see some change, if we really want to see, if the police want to see that the community is not afraid of them, then they need to be listening to members of the community that have been negatively impacted. So I really think that's way more important. And that's the only addition that I wanted to make to what's already been said. So thank you for this process.
All right, thank you, Whitney. Thank you for sharing that, and both echoing what other people have said, but also raising up those particular set of points. It's very helpful to hear.
Thank you, Whitney. Next in our queue, we have Jim Prola. Jim, I'll go ahead and allow you to talk. If you unmute yourself, we'll hear from you this evening.
Hi, I'm sure you can hear me. I'm a past city council member. I have a pretty loud voice, past vice mayor. I know some of you, don't know all of you. I actually like the staff report. I think this is a step that we needed to take at this time. I have no problem with somebody being maybe a retired member of law enforcement. They may be able to add more data that other people who aren't as trained know. It's only 2 members anyway. I don't think we should be putting restrictions on who the council members can appoint. They can appoint anybody, and if the public doesn't like it, they could vote that council member out, because all council members run at large in the city of San Leandro. So I do remember, I don't think anybody that's prejudiced one way or another should be appointed by a council member. But I do remember one time a council member was going to appoint somebody that was terribly anti-police. He had quoted ACAB, which I don't know if all of you know what that means, but it basically is very derogatory and towards police officers. By the time the public got finished with him, he withdrew that consideration for a commission. So it's the council members will listen to public pressure, and the council members, when I was on there, and the boards and commissions did not have to accept what other council members suggested. We usually did. I can think of almost every time we accepted the person that council member was appointing. But if we know something about that council member about that person that a council member is appointing, and maybe that council member didn't, we sure made our opinions known. So I don't think we should be trying to tell the council members who they can't appoint. I think that is done through the election process. And I don't think we should put restrictions. I I like the way it's set up. I really do. I think the auditor will bring viewpoints and can do a lot of research. I think the way I understood it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is he would be paid. We would just pay him on a certain basis. No, the boards and commission members shouldn't. My wife's been on a city board and commission for quite a while, and I don't think they should be paid. I think they should be doing it because they want to do it for the city of San Leandro. And no other board and commission that I know of is paid in the city of San Leandro. I like the fact that this is happening. Like I say, I think it's overdue. It's a start. It's much better than other boards and commissions in a way that are out there right now that review the police department. It's probably, we come from I think the 5th most diverse city in California. That's the last time I was on the city council. And I expect that council members will appoint a diverse group. And I think this is a great start, and I want to thank staff for listening to the community and developing this. That's it.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate your historical perspective and also just the points you raised. It's really good to hear a range of opinions from the community, and it's again very helpful to us. So I know we're at 6:45, so we're going to keep moving through. I think we still have some more people waiting to speak, right?
We do. We have Joel who's up next. Joel, I will unmute you. Go ahead and join us this evening.
Thank you so much. And again, similar to many others, I want to appreciate both the city council as well as staff for putting this together. It seems like an incredibly thoughtful process and product. I am going to respectfully disagree with Mr. Prola. I think the issue here is that the voice of police and the influence of police is pretty clearly felt in this city in ways that seem really, really problematic. And the importance of a space where the thin blue line is not present feels really, really critical, both in terms of process and also in terms of the role that this group, the specific role and reason that this particular body is being created. I certainly can imagine the rationale for having police would be, and I believe maybe Mr. Prohl even said this, that, hey, they might bring certain perspectives that will be critical. We can always bring in officers or bring in people from the force if we need particular information or perspectives. But I feel like for the integrity of this particular body, it's going to be really critical that it not have that influence, because I think there is a particular culture that exists within law enforcement that I think we want to have fairly separate from this process. I guess I have a question, and it may not be one that you're comfortable answering or may be impossible to answer, but I'm guessing you've done a lot of research about review board structures, throughout the country and what that can look like. And I guess what I would love to hear is, how would you sort of rate this proposal on the degree to which it is either progressive or conservative, right? Where would you place it based on the different models that you studied? And then I guess the only other question I would ask is, how are we going to make sure, or actually, I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. Who will be the ultimate body that receives and acts on any recommendations that are made from the oversight board or the auditor? I hope that makes sense. And thank you again for the time.
All right, well, thank you. Maybe I can just very quickly sort of step into the subject matter expert role for a moment and say, through my NACOLE experience, I would say traditionally the standard review board has been the most common way communities have gone. It's been generally seen as progressive. Increasingly, we are seeing communities develop these hybrid proposals where you're taking elements from different traditional models to address the specific needs, history, legal environment, all the different things that pertain to a specific community. So I wouldn't characterize anything as conservative or progressive, but I would say this is a pretty common approach to developing a new oversight model that San Leandro is currently looking at. And then I will turn it over to Eric if he had any answers for the more
Sure.
San Leandro part.
Sure, yeah, happy to. I know in terms of the question about who receives the recommendations, well, certainly in terms of the Community Review Board, this board is essentially an agent of the City Council. And so ultimately, they serve at the pleasure of the council. They make recommendations, but they can make they make recommendations to both really have several audiences. I mean, certainly you have the City Council, you have the city manager in their role as supervising the police chief, and then the police chief themselves. Certainly, we envision, at the discretion of the board, that the police chief or their command staff could be, invited to meetings at their discretion and be, a collaborative partner with the board and providing responsive information and receiving that feedback. And so, yes, I think it would just depend on the nature of the specific recommendations. But I think any of those individuals or groups I just referenced, I think, could be recipients of some of those recommendations.
Right, so Joel, hopefully that gives you at least some answer to your questions. And just want to see if there's anything else before we go on to the next person. Okay, looks like Joel's ready. So Teresa, who's next on our list?
Yeah, we have Mia. Mia, if you unmute yourself and join us this evening, thank you.
Hi, thank you. I too have to strongly disagree with Mr. Prola. The police actions already have police input and perspective and data. A police review board needs the input that the police department does not get. It's unrealistic to think that if the community is upset with a board member, that they're going to vote out the city council member who appointed them. Having two people, especially with a law enforcement background, is nearly 1/3 of the board. And that type of influence is exactly what I believe this board should be avoiding. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mia. Again, appreciate your thoughts, but also appreciate the clarity and the brevity, but it's very powerful. Thank you.
And before I move on to our next speaker, I'm just going to raise up something in the question and answer, which follows along the lines of what Mia expressed. If the council members are allowed to insert a law enforcement officer on the board and we vote that council member off the council, does the law enforcement officer just get to stay on the board? Especially since the council member lost his or her seat because of this. This seems like letting the foxes guard the hen house. So thank you for that comment and the question and answer.
So I'm happy to take a first shot at this. Generally speaking, here in San Leandro, the council members each get to make a selection for a member. Their appointee for representing their district.
I can talk.
And so to the extent, yes, someone were voted out of office, ultimately the new council member who comes in has the discretion to make new appointments.
You pinch it and you like eat it with the soup or the stuff. It's called fufu. You kind of like.
I'm sorry, I think that Mia didn't realize that her mic was still on, so I think we've just muted her, but and now everybody seems to be muted.
Let's do that. I was commenting, Brian, that we are all living life even as we are providing this valuable input to our session. I'm going to unmute Cynthia Chandler. Cynthia, if you are there, go ahead and unmute yourself and join us this evening.
Hi, thank you so much for having this forum. I wanted to add my name in as another person who thinks it's very important to have complete independence from police on this body. I feel like in our community, police already have enormous power and influence. In fact, they have a police chief who's a very powerful person in our government. They have the most powerful lobbying force in our community that shapes the city council and has historically had enormous influence in those elections. And so to imagine that the city council appointments will be free of police influence is in and of itself, I think, a flawed assumption. And even the example that Mr. Prola brought up of, someone being critical of the police being quickly and summarily shot down as someone who was nominated for a position. I think more than showing the influence of random community members, probably is an example that shows the power of the police union on shaping what city council will do. So I feel like, and plus the police also have their own internal oversight apparatus, which has been flawed also already. And right, I mean, we've had a horrific embezzlement scandal. We've had a horrific homicide crime that's taken place in the last year and a half. So their internal oversight has not been effective in shifting culture and policy and practice. So I feel it's essential to make sure that this body is completely free of police influence. And it strikes me as actually quite absurd to imagine that it wouldn't be. I think, anyway, I really do think that it's important for this to truly be a community board, but a community board that is very specifically free of law enforcement involvement and control.
All right, thank you, Cynthia. Again, we've heard this from different people, but each person I think has brought a slightly different perspective to sharing those points around the composition of the board and having law enforcement or former law enforcement. So thank you for that. And I know I was getting close to the end, but maybe we have time for a couple more voices.
Yeah, absolutely. We have Karina Navarro. Go ahead and unmute you. Thank you for joining us and for your patience. You've had your hand up a long time. Karina, if you unmute yourself, you can join us to speak.
Can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Okay, great, thanks. So first of all, I'd like to thank you guys for the work and the thought that the city has been putting into this oversight model. I really appreciate it. So there are a couple of things I wasn't quite sure of in the brief overview that you guys gave of what the Community Police Review Board will be reviewing. And so one question I had was if they will be reviewing any updates to the administrative code regarding the police and also police contracts. Whether they will be able to review the police contracts before they're signed, we'll be able to give feedback to the city council and other things like that. And then a lot of folks have been chiming in about the composition of the board. And I also wanted to note that I've read that in some cases, community review boards end up being sort of stacked by immediate members of the families of police officers. And that they might be less inclined to provide rigorous oversight of, their family members. And so I wanted to check if you guys had considered any criteria for that as well. And that's all. Thank you again.
All right, well, thank you. I think those are both questions for Eric. I don't know if you have answers to them yet or not.
Sure, I'll do my best to take a shot at it. In terms of the first question, in terms of that scope of the policy authority, I think ultimately what we're envisioning here is that it's broad discretion of the majority will of the board as to what police related policies they'd like to look at. So under the example you gave about, I believe under at the administrative code or police contracts, I think generally the lens we're looking at here is issues of compelling community-wide concern as defined by the majority will of the board. And so to the extent that the board, believes that their ability to weigh in on, elements of the administrative code related to policing are of that nature, then that they would have the discretion to discuss those and provide recommendations in regards to them. In terms of the immediate family question, I'm glad you're bringing that up. We have not, that is not something we've specifically addressed in our model, but we're appreciative of you bringing that up. And that is a very interesting and valid question to raise. And I can commit to that we will give its due consideration and evaluation following this meeting. And that's a big part of why we're having these meetings, is to help bring up these types of issues that candidly we hadn't had an opportunity to dive into yet. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you, Eric, and thank you, Karina.
And
So I know we're, oh, perfect. I was gonna say, I know we have a little more time. No, not at all. We're all doing this on Zoom. It's interesting and challenging. So, but I was gonna ask Teresa if you have anything else before we get to the end.
We do have one quick comment in our question and answer that echoes sentiments we just heard. I too agree that there be no board members with law enforcement background. Even one is intimidating. Also, there should not be anyone who is related to a law enforcement individual. I also had a question that I think was answered, but I want to make sure. We had a question that there was a police chief advisory board. Mr. Douglas spoke to that. How will they coordinate with this oversight committee, and will they continue, I assume, to be in effect? Eric, do you know?
Yes, that is a fair question. And I think that is still something that's under evaluation. So I don't know that we have, I would say we're just something we're looking closely at, and that we have not yet, we have not yet made any recommendations on that, but excellent question, and something that we can, will be addressed.
Thank you. We have Bob Bailey joining us again today. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, and we have one more speaker who wishes to finish off after you have completed your thoughts. Thanks for joining us again.
Well, Eric, you almost made it through without me. My apology. No, just really two very quick comments. You know, I think it was Douglas that asked the question, like, what's the life of a recommendation and how does it get processed? I just want to reinforce that I think it's really critically important that the ordinance lay that out. That if a recommendation is made to the chief and then there's a response, and there's an opportunity then to elevate it to the city manager if necessary, and finally to the council. That should be very explicit and in the ordinance, in my opinion. So hopefully you will consider that. And the other is, and I don't think this was the intention, but in describing I know it was a quick overview of the IPA, the Independent Police Auditor. I'm assuming that with the access to all the records and actual being able to observe the internal affairs process and participate in it, that the mandate to be looking at trends and data, that the IPA would have the authority to act on its own discretion to make certain policy recommendations to the chief. Not every policy recommendation would have to be vetted through the CPRB process. Many times I think it would be advisable to do that in a more public way, but I'm assuming that the IPA would be able to, on its own discretion, produce some change internally without necessarily invoking the CPRB process. Is my understanding correct, or is that?
Yes, Bob, I would say, generally speaking, the way we envision this is that, yes, the IPA would, certainly have an open channel opportunities of communication with the police chief. So, yes. So the short answer is yes, we envision that.
Great. Thank you. That's it for me.
All right. Thank you, Bob. And I know Teresa said we have one more person. Oh, I'm sorry.
Nope, my bad. You think I'd get this. I see that it's Mr. Prola joining us again. And then I will have one quick comment at the end of someone who has typed in if we have the time. Mr. Prola, thank you.
Okay. Yes, hi. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. There you are.
I'm only seeing Eric right now, but anyway, I'll make it real quick. I think two people that may or have a background in law enforcement wouldn't prejudice any committee. I think you're cutting the council members short and the committee members short if you think that 28% of a committee or 29% of a committee is going to unduly influence the other 71%. And I don't think you've served on too many committees if you think that's possible. Everybody is going to have their own opinion. Everybody's going to come from different backgrounds. We are a diverse city. On the city council right now, we have a very diverse city council. I can only think of one person that may possibly appoint somebody that might have some law enforcement background that may be retired. But I think if you think that all policemen are prejudiced in favor of other policemen, I think you're wrong too. I know of a lot of policemen that have tried to get rid of police officers in our own city. I could remember brought in police officers from other cities before that were trained to try to save us money from sending them through the academies. And some of those washed out because our own police officers didn't think they would fit in San Leandro. I think you're really selling the council members and the committee members short if you think that they would have undue influence. I know.
Jim, I'm sorry. I'm not quite cutting you off, but I just want, I appreciate what you're saying. And I don't want this meeting to kind of turn into a debate between people of different perspectives. So I think we're hearing your perspective about the ability of council members and committee members to kind of hold their own. So again, I'm not going to stop you from talking, but I just want to encourage you to.
I will say this, that if I think this is a great start, and I think if it's not, we could always change it to make it better if people think it's not working, but I think it's going to work perfectly. That's it.
All right. Thank you, Jim.
I have a finishing comment from Shada, who says, I'm glad we're finally getting to this major change in San Leandro. I strongly agree with the majority of people speaking tonight. I don't believe there is any need to have anyone with backgrounds in law enforcement on the CPRB. They already have a voice in the community, and this board should be ours, the public's. I have Cynthia and Mia with their hands up. I'm not sure if we have time to hear a couple more comments. I will leave that to the discretion of.
I would say maybe some brief, concise final comments.
Fantastic.
Fair game,
All
and
right.
we'll call it at these last two folks who have
All
their
right.
hands raised.
Cynthia, thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to be clear that my perspective about not wanting to have police on this body comes from having 30 years experience of doing policy work on the state level and also the federal level, and seeing how power should not be discounted when seating a body to provide feedback and community perspective. And I think it's disingenuous to imagine that police are similarly situated with power compared to the average community member, both in terms of the power they wield, in terms of holding, the power of force over people in the community, but also because of the influence they do in fact have over the city council. Again, the police union is the most significant lobbying force in our specific community. And so I really would urge, the city council to consider this in designing this committee so that we have an entity where there's not even a perception of power imbalance, and where people can really feel comfortable that the community is being heard. And for that reason, I think it's incredibly important for building bridges with the community and helping the community have trust in our city leadership, as well as in the police, for there not to be police on this body. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Cynthia. And I think Teresa said Mia was also ready to speak.
We do. We have Mia who's going to close us out this evening. Thank you, Mia.
Thank you. I agree with Cynthia. And in addition to the idea of influence, this isn't a matter of assuming police are going to be prejudiced on the board. The mere presence of law enforcement will be intimidating. And the point of this board is to have input from people other than law enforcement. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mia. So I will just say very briefly, I'll probably be the first of a number of people to thank everybody, but this has really been a rich session, and we've got lots of factual information, different perspectives, but also very strong articulation of some of the principles that people in San Leandro feel are vital for this board. So I'm really thankful for this session, and thank you all for participating. And if you were listening and not speaking, thank you for listening. It's all very important to this process, so really very much appreciate it. And I'll hand it back to Teresa.
Thank you. I would like to echo Brian's thanks for joining us this evening, for your very heartfelt comments. Clearly, you have a community that is very engaged, and that's very gratifying to hear. We have put up the slide here related to comments and questions. If you would like to submit thoughts or comments that come up after, please do use those email addresses. If you would like to learn more about the process, we have both of the websites up there, sanleandro.org, as well as ours, which is oirgroup.com. And we look forward to hearing from you again.
And I just want to, again, just to reaffirm, as I mentioned earlier, just want to thank you all for taking part of this. As I mentioned, there's just this whole program will not work if we don't have community buy-in and community input that has helped shape the process. And so that's just a really foundational element of this whole program. And that's why we're having these meetings. And I just want to thank you all for taking part. Your participation truly will make this a better program. And as Teresa mentioned, just my contact information is there on the screen, along with my colleague, Dana Turner from our office, so please include both of us. We also will be posting a recording of this meeting on the city website, and the recording from the first meeting is already there, available from under the latest news section of our home screen. And I do also want to just thank our panelists, for my colleague here, Janelle from the office, as well as Brian and Teresa for helping us out as we facilitated the meeting tonight.
Yes, and as your new assistant city manager, I just want to say thank you. Tonight was a really large group, and I'm excited to work for a city where so many people are engaged.
Yes.
As a new member of the city's leadership team, I find it really important to be able to learn and hear directly from the community. So thank you all very much for coming out tonight and being a part of this. This is very powerful and very important to the work that we are moving into for the future. So thank you again. And thank you, Teresa and Brian, for all of your hard work. You guys did an excellent job, and I definitely appreciate it. So thank you.
You're very kind and you're very welcome. Thank you, Janelle.
Thank you.
Okay, and with that, I believe we can call this meeting adjourned. So
Thanks,
good night,
everyone.
everyone.
Have a good evening.
All right. Take care.